The First Hit by Craig Martell. An Ian Bragg short story. Narrated by Chris Abernathy. They say the first is the hardest. They say the first is the hardest. It wasn't. They were shooting at my squad. It seemed only natural that we shoot back, or we'd get ripped a new one by the platoon sergeant. Fear was a motivator, but not the fear of getting killed. We were young and invincible. That was a long time ago. A different life, and I was a different person. My name is Ian Bragg now, and I'm an operator, I reminded myself for the 100th time. The contract was clear. Take out a drug dealer plying his trade on the streets of Los Angeles. What made him different from other dealers? I had no idea, and it didn't matter. The Peace Archive had put out the contract, and the faceless people at the top had chosen me. Why weren't we taking out all the dealers? It wasn't my place to question. My employer was the Peace Archive, but I wasn't going to get a tax document from them. I was a subcontractor with all finances funneled through a bank in the Caymans, where the information was protected from prying government eyes. That's what I was told, anyway. I had bid $50,000 above the minimum. This would earn me a cool $650,000. Somebody was paying a hefty sum to remove that guy. In the brief for the winning bidder, this street corner was listed as one of a few where he worked his deals. I hadn't been in town for more than a day, and this was the first corner I staked out. Like it was meant to be, he appeared. I hoped all my gigs would be this easy. The first half of the total sum was already in my bank account. That gave me a sense of relief like I'd never had before. Financial independence had never been in sight. I was your average working stiff. Was. Still, money wasn't everything. This was my first contract hit. It felt different from my time in the Marines. I eased onto the street corner, dressed in ragged clothes I had picked up at a second-hand store. I had bought a beater car for cash and a promise to register it later. It was parked 2 blocks away. I carried a single key without a keychain in my pocket. I also had some bills, but no wallet. Paranoia kept me from taking him out right then. There he was. I could walk across the street, act like I wanted to make a deal, and crush his throat or break his neck. But could I get away afterward? Did the camera dome over the intersection include him? If it did, why weren't the police stopping him, since they had all the evidence they needed? But taking him out, I expected that would be frowned upon, while selling drugs was acceptable. I didn't understand, and I would never know, just like I didn't need to know who had submitted this hit to the archive to be turned into a contract. I only needed to act, and they were paying me well to take care of it. They weren't paying me to ask questions. I had a month to execute the contract, but the adrenaline had already begun to flow. What a rush! My muscles ached, begging to be unleashed and deliver a maximum amount of violence on a parasite like Guillaume Bandeau. Once I discovered that I had been awarded the contract, I decided the target was no longer a human being. He deserved a nickname to represent his new status as a soon-to-be corpse. Gum Band. That worked. A car pulled up to his corner. Suburban trash, but they shook hands like old friends. An exchange was made, the buyers left, and Gummy looked for the next customer. A pedestrian strolled by, stopping when she reached Gum Band. They quipped and joked, had a laugh before she continued. Not a customer. A friend. How bad could someone with friends be? Gum Band struck me as a happy guy, enjoying life, not hurting anyone. But he was bad, or there would not have been a contract. I had faith in the system that said he deserved death. I sneered at the world from under my dirty ball cap. A woman walking with her small son steered well clear of me. I flopped down on the sidewalk and tossed my cap on the ground in front of me, open to donations while I watched the world go by. All the while, Gum Band plied his trade without a care in the world. My 5 o'clock shadow hid most of my face. My hair was ruffled from having gone a couple days without getting washed. No one coughed up a dollar bill for me. I had to up my game. I staggered around until I found the obligatory square of cardboard. An oil puddle in the corner from a car with a heavy leak gave me my ink. I used my finger to write PLZHLP in the biggest letters that would fit, moved directly across the street from Gumband, and flopped down again with the sign balanced across my lap. Given a drug dealer's margins, I expected Gummy Boy could throw me a nickel or two, but he dutifully ignored me, which was exactly what I wanted. I made it through the next half hour before two big men appeared, wearing less than congenial expressions. They crossed their arms and stood in front of me, attempting to intimidate me. "You're blocking the sun," I shouted in my best crotchety voice, waving at them to move out of the way. "You're chasing away the customers, so we're here to chase you away." "That's discrimination," I grumbled, letting my head flop sideways. The Man Mountain twins were starting to draw attention. Fine. Deny a man a decent living, you scallywags." "What?" The men looked at each other, unsure of what that meant. It was time to make myself scarce. I pulled myself up the wall and carried my sign as I staggered away at a faster pace than one who was as drunk as I was making myself out to be could move. The two didn't follow. When I reached the street corner, I crossed to the same side as my target. I staggered halfway down and set up shop, dropping my hat to add to the allure. I wouldn't turn down any lunch money that came my way. Two men walked past, kicking my hat away from me until they sent it into the street. I kept my head down and lamented my misfortune. I didn't want to tangle with these guys, since they looked to be making a beeline for my target. Gumband lost his smile, straightened, and became all business. In an instant, a pistol appeared in his hand. I didn't see where it came from, his motion was that quick. He focused 100% of his attention on the two men. I hoped they'd pull their guns, everyone would kill everyone else, and I could get the second half of my contract fee. That was a revelation I hadn't previously contemplated. I only had to see that he died. I was not compelled to kill him myself. The cleanest of all kills were the ones that couldn't be tied to the operator. I jumped up and yelled, "He said, 'Screw you guys, this is his turf!'" All three looked at me. I ran with a tottering gait, feeling there was no need to get away since they wouldn't chase me. I hit the corner and waited for the light. I glanced back to find that I was already forgotten. They were close together, each posturing in his own way. I couldn't see Gumband's hand. I wanted to know where the pistol had come from so I could figure out a way to defeat it. Gumband's small-caliber pistol changed the dynamic. Dirty Harry carried the .44 Magnum, a veritable hand cannon, but real assassins made do with a .22 fired at point-blank range. Noise was a problem when one desired to live to fight another day, so a well-armed enemy changed how a hit would go down. I needed something that could reach out and touch my target. In the Marine Corps, that meant an M14, firing the stalwart NATO 7.62 by 51mm round. I had neither of those, which made this job even more compelling than the justice of getting paid to kill bad guys with no questions asked. In the Marines, I'd fancied myself one who could make do with anything at hand, the improvisation king. I tossed my cardboard sign down and stopped, leaning against a wall with my hands in my pockets. I glanced in all directions to look psychotic enough that no one would stop to ask me any questions. Anonymity was my friend. I chastised myself for my ham-fisted attempt to start a fight between my target and his rivals. It was almost like I was an amateur. I wanted to win, and that meant killing the target and getting away without a trace. I was in competition with the machine, with bureaucracy. I hated bureaucrats, and too often the reason scumbags like Gumband were on the street was because of pencil-pushing bureaucrats who weren't forced to live with the consequences of their decisions. They'd wash their hands of them, leaving the locals to deal with their messes. Or me, after someone with money decided enough was enough. Law and order, but outside the justice system. That was for the regular people, not individuals like Gumband or whoever had paid to have him killed. The altercation was settled as fast as it had started. Gumband and his rivals shook hands. The pistol had disappeared. Gumband strolled across the street, seemingly without a care in the world, and set up shop on the opposite corner. The other two assumed his former place, leaning against the fence of the abandoned lot behind them. Now was not the time to engage. I had time, but the contract weighed on me. I didn't know enough to be confident I could complete it. I was worried that I would lose, and that wasn't the right frame of mind. I staggered off to the car to get changed and stake out Gummy's home. His greatest vulnerability would be traveling between his home and where he worked. I needed more information if I wanted to do this right, especially since I didn't know where he lived. That hadn't been in the brief. I drove my beater car away before stopping in the Walmart parking lot to change clothes so I could go inside and buy a couple of things, like a computer and a burner smartphone. It had cost me a great deal, the entirety of my life savings, to get a fake ID that would pass muster at both the state and federal levels. Once I had that, other things became possible. From my secret bank account, I'd made wire transfers via Western Union to my newly adopted persona, Ian Bragg. I sent money in $5,000 increments and made a transfer every few days until I had enough cash to do the job. I had no credit cards. I didn't need those to tie me to the scene of the crime. Cash was king. Cash was untraceable. The idea that what I was going to do was illegal grated on my soul. I had been in the Marines, and I'd earned my honorable discharge. Justice and honor still meant something to me. I'd been recruited for this job by my old platoon sergeant and my company commander. They said I had the right skills: improv, fearless but cautious, and a keen shot. We hadn't had a sniper unit to support us in the Desert War, so I had filled the role. I could shoot straight under the stress of combat. The ability to perform under a great deal of pressure was what counted the most. They didn't care if I used a gun or a bomb or poison or a push over a railing. The perfect hit was a dead victim of a crime that would go unsolved. They only cared that nothing led back to the archive or me. They didn't want to lose an operator. We were few and far between. I was now a member of an exclusive club, although they'd told me I'd never find out how exclusive. In my mind, there were a lot of bad guys who needed to take a dirt nap. But how many successful people were willing to pay more than $1 million each to make it happen? That was the hierarchy's dilemma. My challenge was helping Gumband cross the Rainbow Bridge. Using my burner smartphone as a hotspot, I brought up the computer and downloaded the software I'd need: a VPN and a dark web browser. I wanted to access the information that wasn't available on the front end. Sometimes it didn't cost anything, and other times it did. The VPN made it look like I was browsing from somewhere else. I chose a different country each time to keep the watchers from seeing a pattern. Those were bad. My anti-terrorism training in the Corps had taught me that. To pay those who roamed the chaotic and ever-shifting landscape of the dark web, I used a prepaid credit card I'd bought with cash. Cash made it much easier to hide, especially when I had bought the credit cards at a store 2 states away. I couldn't have a direct trail leading to me. I got online and navigated into the turbulent waters of the dark web from the front seat of my car. I turned the music down so I could concentrate, but didn't turn it off. Rush had been my constant companion. They'd helped me through this first contract, too. I stopped, thumbed the player to Earthrise, and got back to work. Gumband didn't spend a lot of time online, and he did very little once there. He took the greatest care not to reveal anything about himself, but 2 things that stood out were his electric and water bills. Hidden deep within a recently compromised local utility, I found what I was looking for. I pulled up an internet map with my VPN, which suggested the search was coming from Liechtenstein, and entered the address. It was right on the edge of the high-rent district, well away from where Gumband plied his trade. "Good," I said. trying to convince myself it was a good thing. I won't look out of place. That was more hope than confidence. An axiom I lived by was, hope is a lousy plan. With the directions in hand, I turned up the music. After a dinner consisting of a fried chicken sandwich with extra white sauce, I was ready for a long-term stakeout. Gumband's home stood a block from where I was parked. I had a clear view of it through the windshield. No matter which direction he came from, I'd see him arrive. I had parked directly under a streetlight, so no light shone into the car, keeping it dark inside. I didn't know if he had a car, used public transport, or rode in taxis everywhere. Maybe he bummed rides from people, a dealer living within his means. The house with his name paying the utility bills was an upper-scale 2-story on a corner lot. It didn't have a garage, since it was a little older, but there was a matching carport next to a side entrance that probably led to a kitchen. It wasn't where I would have expected to find a hardcore drug dealer. Ours is not to question why, I thought, although it would be nice to know where my contract came from to help me gauge how to shape the hit. The clock ticked away the hours, and I let the car idle for so long that I burned a quarter tank of gas. I didn't want to run out, so I shut it off. I didn't trust the battery, so I didn't play any music either. I cranked down the window and reclined a touch, sucking in the heavily polluted Los Angeles air. If only an ocean breeze would crop up. Afternoon turned to evening, turned to night. I wondered if Gumband lived there. Who knew what his hours were? I didn't care. This was my current lead, and I was following it. This was my job. I'd stay here until morning if I had to. Patience would give me the edge. As midnight approached, I found I had a hard time staying awake. I got out of the car to stretch my legs, keeping to the shadows as much as possible. A Mercedes S600 with blackened windows and custom wheels rolled by. It was better than a Cadillac Fleetwood with chandeliers on the front fenders, but not by much. It screamed drug dealer to me, but I didn't spend much time in L.A. I had no idea what the $200,000 custom car market represented. The Mercedes Maybach Special Edition was something different, though. Not for your average day worker. Why would Gumband drive something like that? Or was this his supplier? I crouched behind the car, not wanting to have the dome light pop on when I opened the door. I reminded myself to shut that off whenever I could get back in the car. It was almost like I'd never done this before. I glanced around to make sure I was alone. To anyone behind me, I had to look suspicious. This wasn't optimal. Why did this jag-off arrive during the 2 minutes I was outside my car? The Mercedes slow-rolled up the driveway and parked. 2 dark blobs got out. Neither looked like Gummy. They beat on the door loudly enough that I could hear it a block away. They walked around the house and then got back into their car. 10 seconds later, they were cruising slowly down the road. I hurried into the driver's seat and closed the door. I started the engine, thankful it ran, and turned on Rush. 2112 was playing. I backtracked to the beginning of the album and started it again. I was taking serious hits, falling asleep every minute or two. It had been a long day, and I resigned myself to the fact that Gumband didn't live there. I turned on the lights and put the car in gear. I drove toward the house I'd been watching and turned down the side street it abutted. A car came from that direction, turn signal on as it closed. I slowed without hitting the brake. The driver's outline was clear as he passed. Guillaume Bandeau. I drove to the next corner and turned, then stopped and parked far enough down that he wouldn't see me. I shut off the car and jumped out. I hunched my shoulders and bowed my head while walking with my hands in my pockets. Gumband didn't believe in low profile, like his buddies in the Maybach. He drove a Cadillac CT5V Blackwing. I wouldn't be able to run him off the road with my $2,000 side-of-the-highway car. A light came on inside the house. I slowed my approach even though I kept walking so as not to alarm the neighbors. The shades were down, and I couldn't see inside. I needed different equipment to scope the house as it was: an infrared camera, a whisper-quiet drone, listening devices I could attach to the windows. I had none of that, and wasn't about to buy it in this area. If I made the hit and police started looking, they'd connect the dots, and even with my best efforts, they'd get a security camera image of my face. I couldn't have that. It was my first contract. I needed to establish credibility with the archive, earn more contracts, be the best. My competitive nature thrived, even though I had no idea who I was competing against besides myself. Be better. It was a constant struggle when sometimes I couldn't see what better looked like. It wasn't about the money. It was the game. It was seeing the risks and eliminating them until a clear path to the target remained, along with a clear egress. The exit strategy was more important than the hit itself. There was no value in getting caught or killed. Not to me, anyway. But I had learned something valuable. Gumband lived alone. There was no space for a second car. No one waited for him inside. No wonder he hadn't been in a hurry to get home. The lights flicked off. I continued walking. A light came on upstairs. I turned the corner, studying the house out of the corner of my eye, not turning my head to avoid appearing like I was watching. Curtains were drawn, but not the blinds. A shadow passed the window, but he didn't pull the shades aside to look out. He wouldn't be able to see into the darkness anyway. The only benefit of looking out would be to spot someone who wanted to kill him. That someone was out here, although I couldn't take the shot since I didn't have a firearm. I should have rolled another dealer on a different corner. Being armed in this part of the world appeared to be critical. Thugs don't drive a Maybach. So who was pounding on Gummy's door at midnight? It wasn't safe to be out here. I laughed at the irony. What if I was the most dangerous person? I hoped I was, but hoping didn't make it so. I needed more training in a gym, in a dojo, and on a combat range. A little bit of everything. I was strong, but could be stronger. I was fast, and my moves were smooth, but I could be faster. Sparring sharpened the eye and shortened my response time. I could shoot. Range time would reinforce what I already knew while keeping me at the top of my game. I didn't feel I could improve there. I loved to shoot. There was a lot to be said for pulling a trigger to deliver a projectile exactly where intended, no matter the distance. That was the art of the shot. I was very good. Now I was doing a job where I wasn't carrying a firearm. Next time, I'd rectify that. I'd help myself to some delinquent's piece at the beginning of the setup. It needed to be an option. Probably not the first option, but one in a hitman's toolbox nonetheless. Not every problem was a nail that required a hammer, but when it was a nail, it helped to have a hammer in hand. The house went dark, and I continued down the road, turning at the corner, and then once more to get back to my car. I crawled into the back seat and threw a blanket over myself, then set the alarm on the burner phone for 6, giving me 4 hours. Gumband wouldn't be up then, so I'd put myself in a position to follow him. I had no other plan besides that. Follow him, look for a pattern, find the vulnerability, and exploit it. I woke up as refreshed as one could be after sleeping contorted in the back seat. I threw off the blanket and sat up, trying to collect my wits. I got out to climb into the driver's seat, being too big and too old to crawl over the center console. The car turned over instantly and came to life without a backfire. I put it in gear and headed for the nearest gas station to fill up and get a cup of coffee. I was back where I'd started the evening before by 6:15. Gumband's car remained in the driveway. I choked down a microwaved gas station sausage biscuit and sipped my coffee, appropriately doctored with 4 designer creamers to a 20-ounce cup. It was what I liked, and I wouldn't apologize to anyone for it. For having had a minimal amount of bad sleep, I felt sufficiently rested. My beard kept growing. It itched, and I couldn't wait to shave it off. As soon as the hit was made, I'd change how I looked on my way out of town, on a path I hadn't determined yet. I didn't have enough information to form a plan. It was noon before Gumband strolled to his Blackwing, the most expensive vehicle in the Caddy line. It came in at well over $100,000. Then there was the Maybach driver. Drug dealers didn't seem to have a problem flaunting their wealth. How were they not in jail for tax crimes? That was what had brought John Dillinger down. Bureaucrats had much more influence over law-abiding citizens who quaked with fear when the tax police came calling. The dealers probably put out hits on tax collectors' families. The power of violence. Just like I was going to employ. Gumband rolled easily out of the neighborhood until he hit the highway. He accelerated up the on-ramp until he was out of sight. I did my best, but the poor four-door didn't have the guts. I hit the top of the ramp almost at the speed limit and kept the pedal floored to accelerate into traffic and cross to the fast lane, where I joined a line of vehicles trying to set new land speed records. On a bend ahead, I saw Gummy's Caddy slowing for a traffic jam. I slalomed my way forward, getting honked at and given the finger until I was 4 cars behind him. That was close enough. Such anger. I never understood why people lived in big cities just so they could be unhappy. I turned up Rush's Mystic Rhythms. I cranked the window down and hung my arm out to feel the heat boiling off the pavement. Traffic crawled along for the next mile. Then things broke free past where everyone felt obliged to gawk at an accident. I would never understand big cities. Gumband dodged hard to the right, toward the upcoming exit. I signaled and dove into an opening that was smaller than my car. Happy the driver behind backed off rather than get hit. I was amazed that I didn't get into an accident. It was refreshing to turn onto the exit ramp and follow the Caddy down. He took a right at the bottom and continued toward a mall. He rolled twice around the parking lot and was breaking the anti-cruising law when he finally pulled into the last spot in a long row. He got out, leaned against the light pole in front of his car, and waited. I headed to the end of the outside lot and parked where he couldn't see me. I got out, staying low, and maneuvered to a place where I could watch him from between 2 trucks and over the hood of a car without standing out. Cars rolled up and stopped for a quick chat. I couldn't see if anything changed hands. I assumed it did. Which meant Gummy kept the drugs in his house or on him. Was that what the late night was about? Restocking the merchandise? A plan started to form. An hour after Gumband's parking lot drug sales emporium opened for business, a police cruiser approached. He smiled and waved, fearless. It made me wonder what kind of backup he had, and how the archive could put out a contract on that guy, the next one up the food chain. But that wasn't my job. The police stopped and didn't bother getting out. Gummy talked to them briefly before they continued on their way. Gumband got back into his car and drove away. He left the parking lot, caught the light, and was long gone. I had lost him. But I knew what I needed to do. I returned to my hotel room for the first time since yesterday. I caught a shower and hit the rack for a long nap. When the clock struck 8, I got up, took another shower, got dressed, and headed for the high-rent district. I was going to get something good to eat, because I had no intention of making a hit on an empty stomach. That was why the platoon sergeant and the captain wanted me. Pragmatic at all times. After eating, I go back to Gumband's house. We had a date. Despite my best efforts to find a sit-down restaurant, I ended up at the drive-thru for In-N-Out Burger, where I picked up a double-double animal style and fries. I didn't get a shake, since I knew it would sit heavily in my stomach when added to the fries. With burger trash in the passenger side footwell, I parked a block away and on a different street from the previous 2 times I had been in Gummy's neighborhood. I pulled my hoodie over my head to cover my face, jammed my hands in the pouch, and strolled down the sidewalk. I walked past the front side of Gumband's dark house and around the corner to the side entrance. As soon as I reached his driveway, I darted into it. Although Gumband had floodlights, they weren't set to automatic. I'd seen that when he arrived the previous night. I imagined the neighbors complaining about random blinding rays throughout the night as a nearby bush, blown by the wind, kept activating the floods. At the far end of the driveway sat a roller garbage can, one of the big ones that could be picked up by a sanitation truck. Workers didn't even have to get out to empty those. I looked inside. 2 bags of foul-smelling kitchen trash. I removed them and tucked them behind the stairs. I found climbing into the upright can problematic. I needed a step stool, something I didn't have. The can was on the opposite side of the driveway from the short stairs that led into the house. I tipped the can over and climbed in, and with a push-off and a wild gyration, I managed to get it to stand upright. I then practiced getting out. I'm going to get killed, I mumbled to myself. I ended up dumping the can on its side, making way too much noise. I crawled out and listened to make sure the neighbors weren't alarmed. But if they were, I'd find out when the police showed up. Isn't that what alarmed neighbors do? Call the police. I put the garbage bags back inside the can, wiped down anything I had touched, and maneuvered the can a couple of feet closer to the neighbor's fence. I made myself as small as possible behind it and sat facing the street with the can between me and it. That gave me room to adjust when Gummy's headlights cast shadows when he pulled in. I had to stay out of the driver's line of sight. Then I waited. I rocked to my feet with each passing car. 10 became midnight before headlights turned in. I slid my feet under me and stayed crouched, ready to spring into action. My heart jumped. It was the Maybach. 2 men hopped out and repeated their performance from the night before. These were men who were bigger than me. As soon as they turned away from the house, they'd see me. I had to act. I ran toward them while one pounded on the door and the other stood ready to burst in. His hand remained in a pocket where I expected he had a gun. I dodged to the side as I passed, tripping the man on the first step and pulling him backward until I was sure he'd fall. I grabbed the man at the top of the steps and slammed him into the closed door before pulling him back to toss him on the first man, who had hit his head on the concrete, but only hard enough to make him mad. The second man landed on him. When they started to rise, I jumped off the top step and delivered a 2-legged kick into the middle of the top man's back. I pushed off after impact, but it went awry. I hit and rolled, coming to my feet quicker than my opponents. I still didn't know who they were, but this had gone sideways and was now out of control. The only thing I wanted to do was get out of there. That was no longer an option. The garbage can blocked one side, the car the middle, and the 2-man mini pile the other. I closed to disarm the first man, but the second was in the way. I'd replay this debacle in my mind as long as I lived, which I hoped was longer than tonight. The first man pushed the second off him and pulled a .357 Magnum out of his pocket. He tried to roll toward me to take aim. I lunged forward and dipped to launch a roundhouse kick past his face and into his forearm, sending the pistol flying from numb fingers. I jumped away and scrambled toward the pistol, only to find I had company. I tried a sidekick, but the man was upright and dodged to let it slide ineffectively past his hip. He grabbed my hand. I twisted to hit him with a left jab, but it was weak, and he shook it off. He hammered me above the belt with an uppercut that drove the breath out of me. He pushed me away, but I got my feet under me and surged into him, body blocking him into the steps. His friend was struggling to his feet. I could hear his breath rasping and gurgling, broken ribs and a punctured lung from my first kick. He'd only be a threat if he was armed. I wrenched my hand free and punched the side of my opponent's neck. He staggered, and I followed with a kick to the groin that struck home. When he stumbled back, I dropped to grab the Magnum and raised it, only to find myself facing a Glock 19. "That's about enough," the man said with a heavy wheeze. "Are you here for us or for Bando?" "Bando. I thought you were friends." Bando owes me 50 large. He coughed and nearly doubled over from the pain, almost dropping the pistol. I didn't charge into him, a wounded animal being dangerous and all that. The other man lay on the steps, groaning. Do you want him to pay, or do you want him dead? Pay, and then dead. There won't be any more chances for him. The two men were mostly incapacitated. I had won the fight, except they still had a pistol. But they weren't the target. I wasn't being paid to kill them, and I had no beef with them except that they had blown my plan. Move your car down there. I pointed to where I had been the first night. And we'll wait for him right here, all of us. He doesn't owe me any money, but he got my little sister hooked. She committed suicide because of what drugs did to her, so it's time for him to die. Touching. He didn't sound like he was impressed, but he was in no condition to be impressed by anything. Why should we work with you? We can handle this. You were here last night, too, I started, but that would go nowhere. You don't look too good. Need me to call an ambulance? Hell no! He leaned against the railing to support himself. The man on the steps straightened with a grunt before putting his hands on his knees. Why in the nuts? He grumbled. I didn't want to get shot. Still don't. I only want Bando to die. Tonight. I'm tired of waiting and watching. Move the car, the Weezer ordered. The other glared at me as he limped past, but he continued to the car, fired it up, and backed into the street. He drove it down the road to where he could turn around and park it where I had been yesterday. I wondered if he was going to call for backup, then dismissed the idea. The Weezer had a gun and could have shot me. The second man was hired muscle. He did as told. If he came back with a gun and flashed it at me, I'd end them both. Nice ride, I told the Weezer. What's your name? He asked. No, you don't want to know my name any more than I want to know yours. We're going to do this thing, and then we'll be on our merry way. It was time to play my cards. I know what you're thinking. Hit Gummy, and then make it look like he and I killed each other in a shootout. I'm thinking the same thing because I don't want to go to jail, just like you don't. Ain't no prisoners driving a Maybach in the Gray Bar Motel. You recognize my car. That's worth something. You are right. I'm trying to think of a way to kill you both, dump the guns, and walk away. After I get my money, of course. Of course. My mind raced through 100 scenarios, and I died in too many of them. You stand up here with your boy, and I'll wait down by the road to block Gummy in as soon as he starts up his driveway. You know he has a gun. No kidding. There's no one around here who doesn't pack. He watched me as his mind worked. I could see it behind his eyes. When the other man walked up, he sent him down the sidewalk to wait. He'll block him in while you and I wait right here. Just stay in front of me. Don't take this the wrong way, but I don't trust you. He laughed until he coughed, but didn't reply. We had an understanding. One of us was going to die that night. We waited. The man by me grew paler and paler. I wondered if he was going to die before Gummy returned home. By 1:30, he looked like he was going to fall over. I think you should have your boy take you to the hospital. I'll take care of this. You can count on it, but I'm not going to look for your money. Sorry. Despite your kind offer, I'll have to pass. I'm not leaving here without my cash. Have it your way. I threw my hands up in resignation. I didn't throw them too hard since I still held the .357. I liked the way it felt in my hand. Lights shone on the street. They cautiously turned in and started up the driveway until they saw us. I took aim, as did the Weezer, but his hand shook to the point that the safest place to be was where he was aiming. The other man ran up behind Gumband's car and hammered his hands on the trunk, but he was unarmed. Gummy jacked the Cadillac into reverse and floored it. I hammered the Weezer in the side of the head with the butt of my pistol. He fell like a load of bricks. I ran down the driveway as Gummy bounced over the man who had thought to stop him with his body or by force of will. Neither had worked. I skidded to a stop and dropped to a knee. Gummy put the car in drive. In that brief moment, the car was perfectly still in the dead space between backing up and driving forward down the street. I fired twice. A double tap. He was dead with the first round, which exploded his head across the inside of the car. I charged while the car idled forward toward the corner intersection with a dead driver behind its wheel. I wiped the .357 and stuffed it into the hand of the freshly run-over man. I didn't bother to check if he was alive. That didn't matter. Neither of those men could recognize me. I bolted through Gummy's yard to come out on the other street as the Cadillac slow-rolled into a curb and ground to a halt. I pulled my hood up and walked quickly down the block and around the corner. I started my car and drove out the far end of the residential area. My heart pounded. 3 druggies for the price of 1. I headed onto the highway, where traffic was fairly light. I couldn't be seen in the car since it had just left a crime scene. The gunfire should have woken the neighbors, since there aren't many things louder than a .357 banging away in the open air. LAX, a massive airport. I pulled into short-term parking, where I casually wiped the car down, securing my burger trash and taking my music with me on the way to get my bag out of the trunk. I had kept my small bag with me because I never knew when I wouldn't be able to return to the hotel. It held my computer and the burner phone, although neither had any information stored on them. I kept my hood up as I strolled toward the terminal. I stopped at the first bathroom, changed clothes, ditched the trash, and shaved. Between massive amounts of hand sanitizer and scrubbing my hands until my skin was translucent, I figured I had removed any gunpowder residue. I didn't need security crawling up my butt because I made their machine buzz. I then used my smartphone to find the next flight to Denver. It left in 2 hours. I couldn't make reservations since I didn't have a credit card with enough on it, but there were seats available. I headed to the airline counter, paid cash for my ticket, got the 3rd degree at the checkpoint because of the cash ticket purchase, but was cleared. Breakfast sounded good. I looked for a sit-down place. I deserved an omelet, and I'd buy headphones so I could listen to Rush. Roll the Bones would help me relax after the dog's breakfast I had made of my first contract. No one would have to know, but I would never forget. They say the first one is the hardest, but it was done, and soon enough, I'd be out of California. My old beater would get towed after a few days, and in a week, no one would remember it had ever existed. Just like me. The end.